The autumn afternoon had turned cold and gray when 6-year-old Sophie Mitchell stood at the edge of Riverside Elementary School's playground, clutching her worn pink backpack and staring at the empty street where her mother's car should have been. Other children rushed past her, laughing, calling out to parents, climbing into waiting vehicles. But Sophie stood alone, her small frame trembling, not from the chill in the air, but from something far worse. Her brother was missing. 10-year-old Danny had vanished 3 days ago, just disappeared on his walk home from school, like a ghost dissolving into thin air. The police had searched everywhere, the woods behind their neighborhood, the abandoned buildings on Maple Street, the creek where the older kids sometimes played. They'd questioned his friends, checked security cameras, put out alerts. Nothing. It was as if Danny had simply ceased to exist. And Sophie, sweet, quiet Sophie with her tangled brown hair and eyes too old for her face, carried a weight no child should have to bear. Because she'd been the last one to see him. She'd watched him walk away with someone, a figure she couldn't quite remember clearly, a face that blurred in her memory like watercolor in rain. She told the police everything she could, but the details had scattered like leaves, impossible to hold on to. Now she stood on that playground, alone and afraid, waiting for a mother who was 10 minutes late because she'd been at the police station again, begging for answers, for hope, for anything. That's when the dog appeared. Before we start, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It means more than you know. And I'm curious, where are you watching from? Put your country in the comments so we can welcome you. His name was Maverick, though Sophie didn't know that yet. All she saw was an enormous German shepherd, his coat a mix of black and tan that looked almost bronze in the fading light, moving across the playground with purpose and precision. He wore a vest, dark blue with patches that read K-9 unit and police, and his amber eyes were locked directly on her. Sophie froze. She'd always been nervous around big dogs, and this one was massive, easily coming up to her chest, even on all fours. Her breath caught in her throat. The dog drew closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. But Maverick didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. Instead, he stopped directly in front of her and sat, his head tilting slightly to the side as if studying her. His tail gave a single, gentle wag. Good dog, Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. Maverick's ears perked forward. Then he did something that would change everything. He lowered his head, sniffed at Sophie's feet, and gently, so gently it was almost tender, took the tip of her right sneaker between his teeth. "Hey," Sophie said, confused more than frightened now. "That's my shoe." Maverick tugged. Not hard, not aggressively, just a firm, insistent pull. Sophie stumbled forward a step. The dog released her shoe, looked up at her with those intense amber eyes, then grabbed it again and tugged once more. "Stop it," Sophie said, trying to pull her foot back. But Maverick held on, and this time he pulled harder. Sophie's shoe slipped off her foot entirely, and before she could react, the dog turned and bolted. "Wait," Sophie cried out, hopping on one foot. "Come back. That's mine." But Maverick was already gone, racing across the playground toward the chain-link fence that separated the school from the construction site next door. Sophie watched in stunned disbelief as the massive dog squeezed through a gap in the fence, her pink and white sneaker still clamped firmly in his jaws, and disappeared into the maze of half-built structures and construction equipment beyond. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. First her brother, now her shoe. It felt like the universe was determined to take everything from her, piece by piece. "Sophie," a voice called out. Sophie turned to see Officer Rachel Park jogging toward her, her uniform crisp despite the long day, her expression shifting from professional calm to concern. "What happened?" "I saw the dog. Was that Maverick?" "Did he hurt you?" "He took my shoe," Sophie said, her voice breaking. He took it and ran away." Rachel's brow furrowed. She looked toward the construction site, then back at Sophie, her mind clearly racing. "He took your shoe?" Sophie nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. Rachel pulled out her radio, her expression turning serious. "Dispatch, this is Officer Park. I need immediate assistance at Riverside Elementary. K-9 Maverick has gone off course." Repeat, Maverick is off-leash and has entered the construction site adjacent to the school. Requesting backup and K-9 handler Officer Chun to my location immediately. Static crackled, then a male voice responded. Copy that, Officer Park. Units en route. ETA, 3 minutes. Rachel knelt down in front of Sophie, her hands gentle on the child's shoulders. Listen to me, sweetheart. Maverick is a very special dog. He's a search and rescue K-9, which means he's trained to find people. If he took your shoe and ran, there's a reason. Do you understand? Sophie's eyes widened. A reason? Yes, a very important reason. Rachel's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. She'd worked with Maverick and his handler, Officer James Chun, for 2 years. She knew the dog's capabilities, his instincts, his almost supernatural ability to detect what others missed. And she knew something else. Maverick had been part of the search team looking for Danny Mitchell. If Maverick had taken Sophie's shoe and run toward that construction site, it wasn't random. It was a trail, a lead, a scent, hope. Within minutes, 3 patrol cars screeched into the school parking lot. Officers poured out, along with Officer James Chun, a compact, muscular man in his late 30s with kind eyes and a face weathered by years of working alongside his 4-legged partner. The moment he saw Rachel, he broke into a jog. What happened? James demanded, slightly out of breath. Maverick took this little girl's shoe and bolted into the construction site. Rachel said quickly, James, this is Sophie Mitchell. Her brother Danny. James's expression shifted instantly. Recognition, urgency, determination, all flashing across his face in rapid succession. The missing boy. Rachel nodded. James turned to Sophie, crouching down at her eye level. Sophie, I need you to tell me exactly what Maverick did. Every detail. Sophie explained again, her voice small but steady. How the dog had approached her. How he'd sniffed her shoe, taken it, and run. James listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, James stood and looked toward the construction site. The sun was setting now, painting the skeletal frames of unfinished buildings in shades of orange and shadow. Somewhere in that maze of concrete and steel, Maverick was searching. And if James's instincts were right, if Maverick's instincts were right, the dog had found something. Or someone. We go in now, James said, his voice firm. Full team. Bring flashlights, medical kit, and bolt cutters in case we need to get through fencing or debris. And somebody get child services on the line. If we find Danny Mitchell in there, he's going to need immediate medical attention. Rachel placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. You're going to stay right here with Officer Martinez, okay? We're going to find your brother. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Promise? Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted a promise. God, she wanted a promise. But years on the force had taught her not to make guarantees she couldn't keep. Instead, she said, we're going to do everything we can. It would have to be enough. The construction site was a labyrinth. Half-finished apartment buildings rose like tombstones against the darkening sky. Piles of rebar and lumber lay scattered across the muddy ground. Concrete mixers sat idle, their drums still crusted with dried cement. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze, and signs warning of danger were posted every few feet. James led the team through the gap in the fence, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Behind him came Rachel, Officer Martinez, and 2 other officers, Henderson and Ruiz. They moved carefully, calling out Maverick's name, their voices echoing off the empty structures. Maverick, James shouted. Here, boy. Maverick, come. Nothing. Just the whistle of wind through empty window frames and the distant hum of traffic. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep within the site, a bark. Sharp, urgent, insistent. James's heart leaped. There. Southwest corner, near the foundation pit. Move. They ran, boots pounding against broken concrete, flashlights bouncing wildly. The barking grew louder, more frantic, and James felt adrenaline surge through his veins. Maverick didn't bark like that unless he'd found something. Someone. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a massive pile of fallen support beams, wooden planks and metal rods that had collapsed into a chaotic heap. And there, standing atop the pile, silhouetted against the dying light, was Maverick. Sophie's shoe was at his feet, and he was barking directly at the space beneath the beams. "Oh, God," Rachel breathed. James was already moving. "Maverick, good boy. Hold position." The dog obeyed immediately, staying exactly where he was, but continuing to bark, a sound that said, "Here, here, hurry here." James scrambled up the pile, his hands gripping the rough wood, his flashlight clamped between his teeth. When he reached Maverick, he dropped to his knees and shone the light into the narrow gap between the beams. And there, barely visible in the shadows, was a small hand. "I've got him," James shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "He's here. Danny's here." The team exploded into action. Rachel was on her radio instantly, calling for paramedics, for fire rescue, for anyone who could help. Henderson and Ruiz began pulling at the beams, testing their weight, trying to determine the safest way to move them without causing further collapse. James stayed where he was, his flashlight trained on that small, pale hand. "Danny," he called out. "Danny Mitchell. Can you hear me? My name is Officer Chun. We're here to help you, buddy. Can you move your hand if you can hear me?" For a terrible, stretching moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, so slowly James thought he might be imagining it, the fingers twitched. "He moved," James shouted. "He's alive. Move faster. We need to get these beams off him now." Maverick pressed against James's side, whining softly, his eyes fixed on the gap. James reached out with one hand and gripped the dog's head, grounding himself. "Good boy," he whispered. "You found him. You brilliant, incredible boy." More officers arrived. Fire and rescue pulled up moments later, their heavy equipment rumbling across the uneven ground. A crew of firefighters in full gear swarmed the pile, assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. "We've got a partial collapse," the fire captain, a grizzled man named Torres, said grimly. "These beams are load-bearing for what's left of the upper structure. We move them wrong, the whole thing could come down. So what do we do?" Rachel demanded, her voice tight with fear. Torres was already gesturing to his crew. "We stabilize first. Shore up the surrounding beams, then we lift. Slowly, carefully. It's going to take time." "How much time?" James asked, his stomach twisting. 20 minutes. Maybe 30. He might not have 30 minutes. Torres met his gaze, his expression hard but sympathetic. "Then we better work fast." The next 23 minutes felt like 23 hours. The rescue crew worked with incredible precision, placing hydraulic jacks beneath key beams, securing chains, coordinating every movement. James stayed at the top of the pile, talking constantly into the gap, keeping Danny, if he was conscious, focused on his voice. "You're doing great, buddy. Just hang on a little longer. Your mom and your sister are waiting for you. Sophie's been so brave, Danny. She told us everything. She helped us find you. You got an amazing little sister, you know that." No response, but the hand was still there, still visible, and as long as James could see it, he had hope. Maverick never left his side. The dog lay down beside the gap, his nose almost touching the opening, whining softly every few minutes as if trying to comfort the child trapped below. It was behavior James had never seen from him before, this deep, personal connection to a victim. It was as if Maverick understood, on some profound level, that this wasn't just another rescue. This was Sophie's brother. This mattered. "All right," Torres called out. "We're ready. On my count, we lift. Everyone clear except essential personnel. Chun Park, you two stay. The rest of you back 20 feet. Now." The team scattered. Torres positioned himself at the primary hydraulic jack, his hand on the control lever. 2 other firefighters took positions at secondary jacks. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. 3, 2, 1, lift. The hydraulic jacks hissed to life. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the massive beams began to rise. The entire structure groaned, metal scraping against wood, concrete dust raining down. James held his breath, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The gap widened. James shone his flashlight into the space, and his breath caught. Danny Mitchell lay curled on his side, his clothes filthy and torn, his face pale as death. His eyes were closed. Blood matted his hair, but his chest was rising and falling, shallow, irregular breaths that were the most beautiful thing James had ever seen. "I see him," James said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "He's breathing. Keep lifting." The beams rose higher. 2 feet. 3 feet. "Enough. Hold," Torres shouted. The jacks locked in place with a sharp clang. "Chun Park, get him out. You've got maybe 2 minutes before this whole thing shifts." James didn't need to be told twice. He slid into the gap, his body scraping against rough wood and jagged metal, his focus entirely on the small, broken form in front of him. Rachel was right behind him, a medical kit slung over her shoulder. "Danny," James said softly, his hands moving carefully to check for injuries. "We've got you, buddy. You're safe now." Danny's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved, forming soundless words. James leaned closer, his ear near the boy's mouth. "Sophie," Danny whispered, so faint James almost missed it. "Is Sophie okay?" James's throat closed up. This child, trapped and injured and terrified, and his first thought was for his little sister. "She's fine," James managed. "She's waiting for you." Danny's eyes closed again, but a tear slipped down his cheek. Rachel had her hands on his neck, feeling for spinal injuries, checking his pulse. Possible concussion, definitely dehydrated, some lacerations. "We need to move him now." Together, they lifted Danny as carefully as they could, supporting his head and neck, moving him inch by inch toward the opening. Maverick watched intently, his body tense, ready to help if needed. When they finally pulled Danny free, the entire rescue crew exhaled as one. "Clear," James shouted. "We're clear." Torres released the jacks. The beams dropped back into place with a thunderous crash, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. If they'd been 30 seconds slower, James didn't let himself think about it. He focused on Danny, now lying on a backboard as paramedics swarmed around him, attaching monitors, starting in 4, checking vitals. The boy's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and clouded with pain, then closed again. "We're taking him to Riverside General," one of the paramedics said, a young woman with efficient hands and a calm demeanor. "He's stable but critical. Are the parents on the way?" "Yes," Rachel confirmed, her voice shaking slightly. "They're meeting you there." As the paramedics loaded Danny into the ambulance, James finally allowed himself to collapse onto the ground, his legs suddenly too weak to hold him. Maverick was there instantly, pressing his massive head against James's chest, whining softly. James wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in soft fur. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved him. You incredible, brilliant boy." Rachel knelt beside them, her hand resting on Maverick's back. "How did he know?" she asked quietly. "How did he know Sophie she would lead him to Danny?" James pulled back, looking into Maverick's amber eyes. "Scent memory," he said. "Sophie and Danny live in the same house, with the same detergent, eat the same food. Their scents are intertwined." Maverick caught Danny's scent on Sophie's shoe and tracked it here. He connected the dots in a way we never could have. Rachel shook her head in wonder. That's extraordinary. That's Maverick." At Riverside General Hospital, Sophie sat in the waiting room, her remaining shoe tapping anxiously against the linoleum floor. Her mother, Catherine Mitchell, sat beside her, one arm wrapped tightly around her daughter's shoulders, the other hand clutching her husband Robert's. They'd been here for 40 minutes, waiting for news, hoping for a miracle. When the emergency room doors burst open and the paramedics rushed through with a small figure on a stretcher, all 3 of them leaped to their feet. "Danny!" Catherine screamed, lunging forward. 2 nurses gently but firmly held her back. "Mrs. Mitchell, please," one of them said kindly. "Let them work. You can see him as soon as he's stabilized." Sophie stood frozen, her eyes locked on the stretcher, trying to catch a glimpse of her brother through the chaos of medical personnel. She saw a flash of messy brown hair, a pale hand, a blood-stained shirt. Then the doors swung shut, and he was gone. Catherine collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Robert held her, his own face streaked with tears. And Sophie stood there, numb and terrified, unable to process what she'd just seen. Then she heard the click of claws on tile. She turned, and there was Maverick walking through the waiting room doors with Officer Chun right behind him. The dog moved directly to Sophie and sat in front of her, his head tilted, his amber eyes soft and gentle. In his mouth, carefully held between gentle teeth, was Sophie's pink and white sneaker. Sophie stared at the shoe for a long moment, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it from Maverick's mouth. The dog released it immediately, his tail wagging once, twice. "You found him," Sophie whispered. "You found my brother." Maverick's tail wagged harder. James knelt beside them, his uniform still covered in dust and debris. "Danny's going to be okay," he said gently. "The doctors are taking care of him right now. He's hurt, and he's going to need time to heal, but he's alive. Because of you." Sophie looked up confused. "Me? You," James confirmed. "You were wearing this shoe. Your scent was on it, and so was Danny's, because you live together, because you're family." Maverick smelled that connection, and he followed it. He followed it straight to your brother. "You helped save him, Sophie." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Maverick, this enormous dog who'd terrified her just an hour ago, and something inside her broke open. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur, and cried. Maverick stood perfectly still, accepting the embrace, his body warm and solid and safe. Catherine and Robert rushed over, their faces raw with emotion. Catherine dropped to her knees beside Sophie, pulling both her daughter and the dog into an awkward, desperate hug. "Thank you," she sobbed, looking at James, at Maverick, at anyone who would listen. "Thank you for bringing him back." James's throat was too tight to respond. He simply nodded. Over the next hour, the pieces of the story came together. When Danny finally regained consciousness, groggy and disoriented, but lucid enough to speak, he told the police what had happened. 3 days ago, he'd been walking home from school when a man had approached him. Someone Danny vaguely recognized. A maintenance worker who'd been doing repairs around the neighborhood for the past few weeks. The man had seemed friendly, normal. He'd asked Danny if he wanted to see something cool at the construction site. Just for a minute. Danny, curious and trusting in the way only a 10-year-old could be, had followed. Once inside the site, the man's demeanor had changed. He'd become aggressive, demanding Danny's backpack, his phone, anything valuable. When Danny had tried to run, the man had grabbed him, and in the struggle, they'd both fallen into the foundation pit. A pile of support beams had collapsed on top of them. The man, later identified as Marcus Lowe, a construction worker with a history of petty theft, had managed to crawl out. But Danny had been pinned, trapped in a narrow space beneath the rubble. Lowe had panicked, fled, and left Danny to die. For 3 days, Danny had lain there in the dark, drifting in and out of consciousness, unable to move, unable to call for help. He'd survived on rainwater that had pooled in the pit and sheer stubborn will. He'd thought about his family every moment, his mom, his dad, and especially Sophie. Sweet, shy Sophie who'd looked up to him like he was a superhero. The thought of never seeing her again had kept him breathing when everything in him wanted to give up. When James recounted this to the team later that night, back at the precinct, more than one officer had to turn away to hide their tears. The idea of a child enduring that kind of suffering, that kind of fear, was almost unbearable. But Danny had survived. Against every odd, he'd survived. And he'd done so because a canine officer named Maverick had refused to give up, had followed a scent trail no one else could detect, and had led them straight to him. Marcus Lowe was arrested within 12 hours. He'd gone home, cleaned up, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. But security footage from a nearby convenience store placed him at the construction site at the exact time Danny had disappeared. Physical evidence, Danny's torn backpack found in Lowe's garage, sealed his fate. He was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and attempted murder. He wouldn't see freedom again for a very long time. 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning that smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the Riverside Police Department held a small ceremony in the park near the elementary school. It wasn't a grand affair. No media circus, no politicians looking for photo opportunities. Just the people who mattered. Catherine, Robert, Danny, and Sophie stood near the front. Danny was in a wheelchair, his left leg in a cast, his head still wrapped in bandages, but his eyes bright and alert. Sophie stood beside him, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, the other clutching the pink and white sneaker that had started everything. She'd refused to throw it away, insisting it was special now. James stood with Maverick at his side, the dog sitting at perfect attention, his K9 vest freshly cleaned and polished. Other officers from the precinct lined up behind them. Rachel, Martinez, Henderson, Ruiz, all the people who'd been part of the search. The chief of police, a stern woman named Margaret Holland with silver hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward with a small velvet box. "Officer Chun, K9 Maverick," she began, her voice carrying across the small crowd. "It is my honor to present you both with the Medal of Valor, the highest commendation our department can bestow. Your actions 2 weeks ago exemplify everything we strive for as law enforcement officers: courage, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to protecting life. You saved a child who would have otherwise perished. You brought hope to a family in their darkest hour. And you reminded all of us why we do this job." She opened the box, revealing 2 medals, one for James, one that would be attached to Maverick's vest. James stepped forward, and the chief pinned the medal to his uniform. Then she knelt beside Maverick and carefully fastened the second medal to his collar. Maverick's tail wagged, and the crowd erupted in applause. But the ceremony wasn't over. Sophie, with a little encouragement from her mother, stepped forward. She was holding something, a hand-drawn picture, crayon on construction paper. She walked up to Maverick and held it out. "I made this for you," she said shyly. James took it carefully and turned it so everyone could see. It was a child's drawing of a German shepherd with enormous eyes and a smile that stretched across his whole face. Above him, in wobbly letters, Sophie had written, "Maverick the hero." And beside the dog, holding his paw, was a little girl in a pink dress. James's vision blurred. He crouched down beside Sophie and Maverick. "Can I give him this?" Sophie asked quietly. "I think he'd love that," James said, his voice thick. Sophie tucked the picture gently into Maverick's vest, and the dog turned his head, sniffing it curiously before giving Sophie's hand a gentle lick. Sophie giggled, the sound bright and pure, and threw her arms around his neck once more. The crowd applauded again, but all James could see was this little girl and this incredible dog, connected by trauma and rescue, and something deeper than words could express. Danny wheeled his chair forward slowly, his movements still awkward and painful. When he reached Maverick, he stopped and looked down at the dog for a long moment. "I heard you the whole time," Danny said quietly, so only James and Maverick could hear. "When I was trapped down there, I heard you barking. I knew someone was coming. I knew I just had to hold on a little longer." He reached out a trembling hand and placed it on Maverick's head. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Maverick leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly, and James had to look away before he completely lost his composure. Life slowly returned to normal for the Mitchell family. Danny's physical injuries healed over the following months. The leg mended, the concussion resolved, the nightmares gradually faded. But some scars ran deeper, and healing them required patience, therapy, and the unwavering support of people who loved him. Sophie became a different child. Still shy, still quiet, but with a core of steel that hadn't been there before. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter, reading to the dogs, helping with training. She told everyone who would listen about Maverick, about how he'd saved her brother, about how dogs were heroes. And every Saturday, James would bring Maverick to the park, and the Mitchell family would meet them there. Sophie and Danny would play fetch with the big German shepherd, laughing as he bounded across the grass. Catherine and Robert would sit on a bench with James, talking about ordinary things, school, work, the weather, finding comfort in normalcy. One Saturday in late spring, nearly 6 months after the rescue, Sophie approached James with a serious expression on her small face. "Officer Chun," she said formally, "I've made a decision." James tried not to smile. "What's that, Sophie?" "When I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer, with a K9 partner, just like you and Maverick." James's heart swelled. He knelt down to her level. "That's a wonderful goal. And I'm going to save people, Sophie continued, her voice gaining confidence. Just like Maverick saved Danny, I'm going to help families that are scared and sad. I'm going to bring them hope. James looked at this little girl, this brave, resilient, extraordinary little girl, and saw the officer she would one day become. I believe you, he said sincerely, and when that day comes, I'd be honored to help train you. Sophie's face lit up. Then she did something that surprised him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a plastic canine badge, the kind sold in toy stores. She held out to him. This is for Maverick, she said, so he knows he's my hero. Forever. James took the badge carefully, his throat too tight for words. He attached it to Maverick's collar, right next to the Medal of Valor. The dog looked up at him, then at Sophie, his tail wagging. He knows, James managed. He knows. Years would pass. Sophie would grow up, just as she promised, with Maverick's picture still hanging on her bedroom wall. She would excel in school, study criminal justice, and eventually join the police academy. And on the day of her graduation, a much older officer, James Chun, now a training supervisor, would be there in the audience, watching with pride. Maverick would long since have retired by then, living out his final years in peaceful comfort with James and his family. But the legacy of what he'd done that autumn day would live on, inspiring a new generation of canine officers and the handlers who worked alongside them. Because sometimes heroism isn't about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's about following your instincts when everyone else has given up. It's about refusing to stop searching when logic says there's nothing left to find. It's about the unbreakable bond between a dog and the people he's sworn to protect. It's about a stolen shoe, a desperate child, and a German shepherd who understood that love leaves a trail, and that trail, no matter how faint, is always worth following. That's what Sophie learned that day. That's what Danny learned. And that's what everyone who heard their story would carry with them forever. Hope is real. Miracles happen, and heroes walk among us, sometimes on four legs, with amber eyes and hearts bigger than the world. The bond that formed between the Mitchell family and Officer Chun with Maverick wasn't one that faded with time. It deepened, rooted itself in gratitude and mutual respect, and grew into something resembling family. James found himself invited to birthday parties and holiday dinners. Maverick became a fixture in the children's lives, no longer just the hero who'd saved Danny, but a friend, a protector, a constant source of comfort and joy. On Danny's 12th birthday, nearly 2 years after the rescue, the Mitchells threw a backyard barbecue. Friends and family filled the yard. Children ran shrieking through sprinklers, and the smell of grilled hamburgers filled the warm summer air. James arrived with Maverick, who was immediately mobbed by Danny and Sophie, both demanding his attention with equal enthusiasm. Easy, easy, James laughed, watching as the big dog tolerated being hugged from both sides. He's not as young as he used to be. Maverick was 8 now, still strong and capable, but showing the first signs of age, a few white hairs around his muzzle, a slightly slower rise when he stood from lying down. James felt a pang every time he noticed these small changes, knowing that their time together, while still precious, was no longer infinite. Catherine emerged from the house, carrying a cake ablaze with 12 candles. As everyone gathered to sing, Danny looked around at the faces of the people he loved, his parents, his sister, his friends. And when his gaze landed on Maverick, sitting calmly beside James, something shifted in his expression. After the song ended and the candles were blown out, Danny set down his plate and walked over to James. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked quietly. "Of course, buddy." They moved to a quieter corner of the yard, Maverick padding along beside them. Danny was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He'd changed so much in 2 years, grown taller, his voice beginning to deepen, his face losing some of that childhood softness. But in this moment, he looked young again, vulnerable. "I've been having nightmares again," Danny admitted, not meeting James's eyes. "Not as bad as before, but they're there. I dream about being trapped, about the dark, about thinking no one's going to find me." James's heart clenched. "Have you told your parents?" "Yeah, my therapist too. They're helping." But Danny finally looked up, his eyes shining. The thing that helps the most is remembering that Maverick didn't give up. That even when it seemed impossible, even when everyone had searched everywhere, he found me. That someone cared enough to keep looking. He knelt down beside Maverick, running his hand through the dog's fur. I wanted to say thank you. Again, I know I've said it before, but I don't think I really understood what it meant until now. You gave me my life back. Both of you. James had to clear his throat before he could speak. You're a brave kid, Danny. What you survived, most adults couldn't handle that. The fact that you're here, healthy and strong and celebrating with your family, that's all you. Maybe, Danny said with a small smile. But Maverick gave me the chance to be here. And that's everything. Maverick leaned against Danny's leg, and the boy wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, holding on as if drawing strength from that solid, steady presence. James watched them, feeling the weight of what his partner had accomplished. Not just the rescue itself, but the ripples it had sent through this family's life, the healing it had enabled. This was why he did the job. Not for the medals or the recognition, but for moments like this. For the quiet knowledge that they made a difference when it mattered most. As Maverick aged, James began preparing for the inevitable. The dog would retire eventually, would spend his final years resting rather than working. It was the natural order of things, but that didn't make it easier to accept. Sophie, now 9 years old and more determined than ever to follow in James's footsteps, asked him one day during one of their Saturday park visits, "What happens to police dogs when they get too old to work?" James sat down on the bench beside her, Maverick resting at his feet in a patch of sun. "Well, most of them retire and live with their handlers. They become regular pets, get to relax, and enjoy life without the pressure of the job." "Will Maverick live with you?" "Absolutely. He's family." Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Then, will you get a new partner?" James had been thinking about that a lot lately. "Probably. The department needs K-9 officers, and I still have years left before I retire. But it won't be the same. Maverick's special. He's the best," Sophie agreed firmly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Danny and some of his friends kick a soccer ball across the field. Then Sophie said, very quietly, "I'm scared of forgetting." James looked at her. "Forgetting what, sweetheart?" "How scared I was that day. How it felt when Danny was missing. I don't want to forget, because if I forget, it means it wasn't important. And it was the most important thing that ever happened to us." James's chest ached. He put an arm around Sophie's small shoulders. "You won't forget," he said gently. "Some things stay with us forever, not because they're painful, but because they changed us, because they taught us something crucial about who we are and what we're capable of. You'll remember, Sophie, and that's okay. It's good even, because it made you stronger." Sophie leaned against him, and Maverick shifted, resting his head on her lap. The three of them sat like that for a long time, connected by tragedy and rescue and the unbreakable bonds that form when people and dogs face darkness together and emerge on the other side. Maverick officially retired at age 9. There was a ceremony, of course, smaller than the Medal of Valor presentation, but no less meaningful. The entire Mitchell family attended, along with what seemed like half the police department. Maverick's vest was ceremonially removed, replaced with a simple collar that read "Retired Hero" in bold letters. James's voice shook as he addressed the crowd. "Maverick has served this community with distinction for 7 years. He's located missing persons, assisted in criminal apprehensions, and performed search and rescue operations that save countless lives. But more than that, he's been my partner, my friend, and the best colleague I could ever ask for. He's earned his rest, and I'm honored to give him a home where he can spend his remaining years in peace and comfort." As the crowd applauded, Sophie and Danny came forward, each carrying a framed photograph. The first showed Maverick in his prime, alert and focused, every inch the professional K-9 officer. The second, taken just weeks ago, showed him lying in the grass with Sophie and Danny on either side, all three of them grinning at the camera. "These are for you," Sophie said, presenting them to James. "So you never forget how amazing he is." James accepted them, his vision blurring. "Thank you, both of you." Maverick, for his part, seemed utterly unconcerned with the ceremony. He sat patiently through the speeches and photos, tail wagging whenever someone approached to pet him. And when it was finally over, He trotted happily to James's car, ready to go home. Retirement suited him. Without the demands of training and field work, Maverick spent his days lounging in sunny spots, going on leisurely walks, and being thoroughly spoiled by James's family. He'd earned it every moment of peace. But some instincts never truly retire. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, nearly a year after Maverick's retirement. James had stopped by the Mitchell house to drop off some paperwork for Catherine, who volunteered with a youth outreach program James supported. Sophie and Danny were home, enjoying the last days of summer vacation before school started again. Maverick had come along for the visit, as he usually did. He was slower now, his movements stiff with arthritis, but his mind was still sharp, his awareness still keen. They were all in the living room, James and Catherine discussing program logistics, Sophie showing Maverick a new trick she taught her own dog, a rambunctious golden retriever puppy named Chance, Danny reading on the couch, when Maverick suddenly went rigid. His head snapped toward the front door. His ears stood erect. A low, rumbling growl emerged from his chest, a sound James hadn't heard from him in months. "Maverick," James said, immediately alert. "What is it, boy?" Maverick moved to the door, his body tense despite his age. He sniffed at the crack beneath it, then barked, sharp, urgent, the same bark he'd used when he was working. James was on his feet instantly, his hand instinctively moving to his hip where his service weapon rested. "Catherine, take the kids to the back room." Now, Catherine didn't argue. Years of living with fear after Danny's disappearance had taught her to trust her instincts. She grabbed Sophie and Danny and hustled them toward the back of the house. James moved to the window, carefully pulling the curtain aside just enough to see out. His blood ran cold. A man stood on the sidewalk across the street, partially hidden behind a tree. He was watching the house with an intensity that made every alarm in James's head go off. And he looked familiar, pale skin, a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. Marcus Lowe. He wasn't supposed to be out. His trial had resulted in a 20-year sentence. But standing there, staring at the Mitchell house with unmistakable malice, was the man who'd tried to kill Danny. James pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice low and urgent as he provided the address and situation. Then he called the precinct directly, requesting immediate backup. Maverick never stopped growling. Even retired, even old, the dog understood threat, and he was prepared to defend his family. The standoff lasted 7 agonizing minutes. Lowe didn't approach the house, but he didn't leave either. He just stood there, watching, his intentions unclear but undoubtedly hostile. Then patrol cars appeared, silent but swift. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, moving to surround Lowe. The man realized too late that he was cornered. He tried to run, but age in prison had slowed him down. He was tackled within 50 feet, cuffed, and hauled to his feet. It turned out he'd been released early due to a clerical error, a bureaucratic nightmare that had put a dangerous criminal back on the streets. He'd come straight to the Mitchell house, motivated by rage and a twisted desire for revenge against the family whose testimony had put him away. If Maverick hadn't sensed him, if the old dog's instincts hadn't kicked in one more time, who knows what might have happened. But Maverick had done his job, even in retirement, protecting the family he'd saved once before. When the danger had passed and Lowe was back in custody, this time with additional charges that would ensure he never walked free again, Catherine emerged from the back room with Sophie and Danny. All three were shaken but unharmed. Catherine walked straight to Maverick and sank to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us again," she whispered, her hands cupping the dog's graying face. "How do we ever repay you?" Maverick simply wagged his tail and licked her cheek. Danny and Sophie joined her, creating a protective circle around the old dog. James stood back, watching, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Maverick had been retired for nearly a year. He should have been oblivious to the danger, lost in the peaceful fog of old age. But he'd been alert, aware, ready. Still a guardian. Still a hero. "He's not just a dog," Sophie said, her voice thick with tears. "He's an angel." James couldn't argue with that. The incident made the news. Retired police dog foils revenge plot, read the headlines. Reporters called, wanting interviews, wanted to tell Maverick's story all over again. James declined most of them, but he did agree to one, a human interest piece for the local paper, with the stipulation that the focus be on the importance of canine units and the incredible capabilities of working dogs. The article featured a photo of Maverick lying in James's living room, his graying muzzle resting on his paws, the Medal of Valor still hanging on the wall behind him. Beside him sat Sophie and Danny, both smiling, both safe. The article concluded with a quote from James. Dogs like Maverick don't do what they do for recognition or reward. They do it because it's who they are. They're loyal, courageous, and selfless in ways that put most humans to shame. Maverick saved Danny Mitchell's life when he was at the peak of his career. And years later, even in retirement, he was still protecting that same family. That's the kind of dedication we should all aspire to. The article went viral. Thousands of people shared it, commented on it, expressed their admiration for Maverick. Donations poured into the police department's K-9 unit fund. Schools invited James and Maverick to come speak, to educate children about the importance of police dogs and safety awareness. Sophie and Danny became minor celebrities at their school, their classmates eager to hear about the hero dog who'd saved them twice. But the kids handled it with grace, always redirecting the attention to the importance of never talking to strangers, of trusting their instincts, of knowing that help was always available if they needed it. They become advocates, in their own small way, for other children who'd experienced trauma. Danny started a peer support group at school for kids dealing with anxiety and PTSD. Sophie volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend, helping to train dogs and educate families about responsible pet ownership. They'd taken their pain and turned it into purpose. And Maverick had been the catalyst for all of it. Maverick passed away peacefully at age 11, surrounded by everyone who loved him. It happened on a cool autumn evening, the same season in which he'd found Danny all those years ago. He'd spent the day at the park with James, Sophie, and Danny, playing gentle games of fetch, soaking up the sunshine, accepting treats and affection from everyone who recognized him. That night, back at James's house, Maverick had settled into his favorite spot by the fireplace. James had been sitting beside him, one hand resting on the dog's head, when Maverick had let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes. His breathing had slowed, then stopped, so gently that for a moment James thought he was just sleeping. But he was gone, peacefully, painlessly, after a life well lived. James had sat there for a long time, his hand still on Maverick's head, tears streaming silently down his face. He'd known this day was coming, had known it for years, but that didn't make it hurt less. Maverick had been more than a partner. He'd been family, a piece of James's heart, walking beside him every day. The funeral was small but profound. The entire K-9 unit attended, along with the Mitchell family and dozens of others whose lives Maverick had touched. The department held a full honors ceremony, a flag-draped casket, a gun salute, taps played by a lone trumpeter as the sun set over the cemetery. Sophie and Danny stood beside James, both crying openly. When it came time to speak, Danny stepped forward, his voice shaking but clear. "Maverick saved my life," he said simply. "But he did more than that. He taught me that hope is real, that people and dogs will fight for you even when it seems impossible. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are scared. He was the best of us, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what he did for me." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. After the ceremony, as people dispersed, Sophie approached James. She was holding something, a folded piece of paper, worn and creased for being carried in her pocket. "I want you to have this," she said quietly, pressing it into his hand. James unfolded it. It was the crayon drawing Sophie had made all those years ago. Maverick the hero, with the little girl holding the dog's paw. The paper had yellowed slightly, the crayon lines faded, but the love poured into every stroke was still vibrant, still alive. "I've kept it all this time," Sophie said, "but I think it belongs with you now, so you can remember him the way I do, as the best friend I ever had." James pulled Sophie into a hug, the drawing clutched carefully in his hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for loving him as much as I did." "Always," Sophie promised. Years continued to pass. Sophie grew up and, true to her childhood promise, joined the police academy at age 21. She excelled, particularly in the K-9 program, and was eventually partnered with a German shepherd named Echo, a young, energetic dog with Maverick's intelligence and heart. On Sophie's first day as a certified K-9 officer, James, now retired himself but still active in training new handlers, presented her with a gift. It was Maverick's Medal of Valor, carefully preserved in a shadow box along with his collar and a photo of him in his prime. "We want you to have this," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "to remind you why you're doing this, and to know that his legacy lives on through you." Sophie accepted the gift with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "I won't let him down," she promised. "You couldn't if you tried," James assured her. Sophie's career was remarkable. She and Echo became one of the most successful K-9 teams in the department's history, specializing in search and rescue operations. Over the years, they located missing children, helped apprehend dangerous criminals, and saved countless lives. And every single time Sophie and Echo went out on a call, Sophie would touch the small photo of Maverick she kept tucked in her vest and whisper, "Guide us, old friend." She swore she could feel him with her, a steady presence watching over her shoulder, lending her strength when she needed it most. On the 10th anniversary of Danny's rescue, the city of Riverside dedicated a memorial in the park where Maverick had been honored all those years ago. It was a bronze statue, life-sized, stunningly detailed, of a German shepherd standing alert and proud, a small shoe held gently in his mouth. At the base, a plaque read, "In memory of K-9 Officer Maverick, hero, guardian, friend, who taught us that courage has 4 legs, and love leaves a trail worth following." The unveiling ceremony drew hundreds. James was there, older now, but still strong, his eyes bright with pride and grief. Danny attended with his wife and young daughter, a 3-year-old named Mackenzie who had Maverick's amber-colored eyes, or so everyone insisted. Sophie stood in her dress uniform, Echo sitting obediently at her side, the living continuation of Maverick's legacy. When the cloth was pulled away and the statue revealed, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was perfect, capturing Maverick's strength, his dignity, his unwavering dedication. Children immediately rushed forward to touch the statue, to pet the bronze fur, to marvel at the dog who'd become a legend. Parents told them the story, the stolen shoe, the desperate search, the boy trapped beneath rubble, the hero who'd refused to give up. And as the sun set over the park, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, James stood beside the statue with Sophie and Danny flanking him. Echo sat between them, calm and observant, as if understanding the significance of the moment. "He'd be so proud of you," James said to Sophie, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I hope so," Sophie replied, her voice soft. "I try to honor him every day." "You do," Danny added. "Every life you save, every person you help. That's Maverick's legacy. That's all of us, choosing to be better because of what he showed us was possible." James looked at the statue, at the bronze dog frozen forever in that moment of heroic purpose, and felt a profound sense of peace. Maverick was gone, but he wasn't forgotten. He lived on in the officers he'd inspired, in the children he'd saved, in the countless people who heard his story and chose to believe in heroes. Because heroes are real. They walk among us, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. They teach us about loyalty, courage, and the power of refusing to give up even when all hope seems lost. They teach us that love is stronger than fear. And they teach us that sometimes a single act of bravery, a stolen shoe, a desperate swim, a refusal to stop searching, can change the world. Maverick had changed the world, one family at a time, one rescued child at a time, one inspired young officer at a time. And his story would live forever, a testament to the unbreakable bond between humans and the extraordinary dogs who serve beside them, asking for nothing but the chance to protect the ones they love. That evening, as the ceremony ended and people began to drift away, a little girl, no more than 6 or 7, with brown hair and pigtails and a pink jacket, approached the statue. She stood on her tiptoes and very carefully placed a single daisy at the bronze dog's feet. "Thank you for being a hero," she whispered. And somewhere, in whatever place good dogs go when their work on Earth is done, Maverick's tail wagged one more time.